Alrighty, so in this video, what we're going to do is we are going to take a look at how we can write React components for the way that we've set up Webpack and Babel and all that fun stuff. So I wanted to separate this out before we start looking at how we can hot reload our components and our scripts. I want to take a step back and talk about how exactly we will be writing these components. And it'll be a really short video. There's not a whole lot to do besides installing React, adding it to our Webpack configuration, and I'll show you guys how we can create a component using class syntax and import statements. There's a couple caveats that are very, very important to understand that we previously did not have to deal with when writing our React code using the browser Babel plugin thingy. So let's go ahead and get started. First step is we need two packages. Just like what we did with Bower, we need to install npm install --save React and react-dom. So of course React is the core React library that includes all the engine of React, if you will, and then the React DOM is the package that will hook React into a web page for us in a dynamic, sort of awesome way. And that contrasts to React Server, which is used to render out React applications to a string so that they can be served without having JavaScript have to render that out on first load. Anyway, with React to React DOM added, I'm going to jump into Webpack config, and I'm going to add both of those packages to our vendor array. So React and React DOM. And what that'll do is that will push the React and React DOM packages into our vendor.js file, which is really important for performance reasons, because we don't want to have to recompile React and React DOM every time we make a change somewhere. Or I guess by recompile I mean reprocess, but you know what I mean. Anyway, so now that we have that added to our vendor, we can go ahead and start up our Gulp dev task again. Again, every time you change webpack.config.js or your Gulp file, be sure to restart your Gulp tasks. So now if I hop into source client, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create our first component. And the component is just going to be app. It's going to be the app component. It's going to be kind of the root component of the entire application. So I'm going to come over here to client, right-click, hit new folder, and create a folder called components. And then every single, probably every single component will have both a JavaScript file and a SASS file. So the JavaScript file for the component itself and SASS for the styles. So I'm going to do app.js for our JavaScript file. Then I'm going to create a new file called app.scss. Now, I'm not going to be writing any styles in this video, but I do want to go ahead and get in the habit of creating the SCSS files along with the JavaScript files. And then the first thing to do in the JavaScript file is simply import app.scss. So again, just like what I said before, I really like having my styles right next to my components on the file system. It makes separation of concerns a whole lot easier to do with this. So now let's talk about how we would go about creating and exporting a component from this file. So unlike in our previous example, the React object, the uppercase React object that JSX will execute the create element method of when it sees us using JSX, is not a global object. Before it was a global object where we just included a script tag that pointed to React on the page itself, so it was attached to window dot, right? Well, in this case, in this scenario, the way we have things set up is every component, every package is going to be included manually. There will be no attachment to the global window object. And that's just, proper coding practice. And having our import statements and export statements allow us to make sure that files include the property dependencies without having to rely on the existence of global objects. But again, that causes a problem. And the problem is that if I had some JSX in this file, after it gets compiled, it would be pointing and referencing a global variable called React with the uppercase R. And then when I go to execute that code, well, there's no React global, so it won't work. It'll throw a reference error. So what we have to do is we have to import React into every single file, every single JavaScript file that's going to use JSX. And that's simply going to be import React from React. And by doing this, the compiled code, the compiled JSX, will properly be able to reference this variable, but without us having to create a global object. So Well, so now we can create our class just like we did before, but we are going to be extending from React component. So what I want to show you guys a quick trick here. I can do certainly class app component. Actually, I'm going to be calling this app container. I can certainly do class app container extends react.component, but that's because of the way the import statement works here. What this is doing is this is pulling in the default export of this package into this one variable. So I can do a react.component. But I kind of like doing it a little bit different. I like importing the React, well, obviously you have to import the default React into the React variable, but I also like importing component as an individual thing so that we can simply do class app container extends component. So what this syntax does is this will import the default package, the default object from the React package, but it'll also import react.component into a variable called component. And this will just make our code just a little bit more terse. It makes a whole lot more sense when, like we use prop types a lot. We can just include prop types and not have to type in react.prop types all the time. So I kind of got in the habit of doing it like this. So now we have a class app container extends component, and we can have a render method, and the render method can return an h1 hello world. Not the most exciting application ever written. But as of now, this file is valid. And we're only missing one thing, and that is we are not exporting anything. So there's no way for other files to reach in and grab this class because it is private to this particular module. So we have to make sure to export it. Now the way that I'm going to export this class, and there's a couple ways I could say simply export class app container. I could say export default class app container to make it the default export. I'm actually going to do that down here though. I'm going to say export default app container after I define it there. And the reason I'm doing this is going to become a lot more apparent in upcoming videos. We're actually going to be wrapping the app container into another component when we export it. So that's why I'm separating out the export default app container from the actual definition of the component itself. This isn't strictly necessary in all cases, but because, you know, I know where we're going with this project, I know that we will be changing the way that this is exported later, so I'll leave it as a separate export statement. And it also shows you guys a different little bit of syntax if you're not so familiar with the export syntax. But anyway, that is a component. It's not particularly exciting, but it works. So let's go ahead and jump down to our client.js and actually include this component and render it out to the screen. So all we have to do here is we do need to import React from React. That's important because we're going to be using JSX in the render method. Then I'm going to import React DOM from React-DOM. I could certainly, because the only method we're going to be needing on React DOM is render, I could import with brackets render from React DOM, but I find render to be a little bit too of a generic name for me to import that directly as a global import to this particular module. So I'm going to import React DOM, and then I'm going to import app container from /components app. Now, of course, the name doesn't matter here because we're importing the default export of this module, so I can name this whatever I want. Though make sure that you import it with an uppercase A, of course. And then I'm simply going to come down here and say React DOM.render, and I'm going to pass in app container as JSX, and I'm going to pass in document get element by ID mount. So really straightforward, and now the bundle is valid, and now ESLint is no longer yelling at us. So now we should be able to go to our browser and hit refresh. And indeed, we do get the app component rendered. We can check the React developer tools and see app component is being rendered, and app component has an h1 element underneath it. And there we go. That's basically all there is to it. There are just a couple little caveats and a couple little bits of syntax that I wanted to cover, if in the case that you are not so familiar with it. However, we won't be able to hot reload just yet. If I come over here to app.js and modify and hit Control-S, you'll notice in our console it says the following modules could not be hot updated. In the next video, we're actually going to take a look at how we can do that. And we'll see you guys then.